Tonight, former Canberra Liberals leader Jeremy Hanson to challenge for the top job as party elders warn against a shift to the right. Yuma, good evening. I'm Adrienne coming to you from Ngunnawal country, and we also acknowledge others with connections to the lands of the ACT. This is ABC News. Also tonight, King Charles and Queen Camilla greeted by thousands during a whirlwind tour of the nation's capital. The University of Canberra to cut hundreds of jobs, blaming itself for spending beyond its means. And Forever Chemicals, Australia plans a drastic cut to the level of PFAS considered safe in drinking water. There's conflict brewing over the leadership of the Canberra Liberals as the counting of votes continues to determine the exact makeup of the next ACT Legislative Assembly. The Liberals are in familiar territory, with former leader Jeremy Hanson announcing his intention to contest the party leadership when the position is spilled next month.
Less than 48 hours after Canberra Liberals leader Elizabeth Lee conceded defeat in the election,
we haven't got across the line.
A familiar face was already making his case for a return to the top.
I'll be putting my hand up for the leadership of the Canberra Liberals, looking forward to 2028. I believe that I'm in the best position to lead the party to victory.
Today, Mr Hanson, who opposed the ACT's drug decriminalisation laws, voluntary assisted dying bill and opposed the voice to Parliament, sought to downplay internal party politics and his characterisation as a member of the party's right wing.
At the end of the day, I'm a Liberal. And I don't shy away from that.
Mr Hanson led the party between 2013 and 2016, winning 11 seats but also delivering an election loss and a 2.2% swing against them. He acted as opposition leader while Ms Lee was on maternity leave but was dumped as deputy leader in December last year after tensions grew between the pair. The leadership of the Liberal Party is traditionally spilled after an election loss. And although the exact makeup of the party room is dependent on a couple of seats which have yet to be called, battle lines are already being drawn for what appears to be yet another factional fight between the party's moderate and right wing. The latter, a direction which current and former Liberal figures have warned the party against taking.
I want them to tell me where those extra primary votes are going to come from. Because on the political landscape, when you look over to the right from us, there's only Family First and the Belko Party, and their vote is minuscule.
They can win in the future, but they've got to keep away from right-wing policies, conservative approaches.
The Chief Minister, now set for another 4 years in government, was today firmly focused on his own party.
The election produced some swings against some of the incumbent parties, including Labor, so there are always lessons to learn.
What the next Assembly will look like is becoming clearer as vote counting continues. Today, the ABC called a 9th seat in the electorate of Ginninderra in favour of Liberal candidate Sharka Barry, while sitting Greens MLA Andrew Braddock has retained his Yerraby seat and veteran Labor MLA Mick Gentleman remains in the race for the final seat in Brindabella. Lottie Twyford, ABC News, Canberra.
A parliamentary reception for King Charles and Queen Camilla in Canberra was shaken by protests today, with Victorian Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe hurling insults and accusations at the monarch before being escorted out. It disrupted an otherwise carefully coordinated day in the nation's capital, where thousands of well-wishers gathered for a chance to meet the royal couple. Political reporter Stephanie Dalzell has more.
They died for king and country. And now the King honouring them. King Charles and Queen Camilla at the War Memorial in Canberra, starting a day of royal engagements in the capital. Outside, more than 4,000 people waited hours for a glimpse of the pair. Many enamoured.
God save the King.
Some, like 9-year-old alpaca Hefner, less so.
He's met a few famous people over his times.
On the forecourt of Parliament House, a more enthusiastic greeting. 21 shots, salutes and handshakes, with crowds camping out to be part of history. Prime Ministers past and present were inside the People's House for a parliamentary reception. As tributes were paid,
you have stood with us proudly in good times.
and gratefully received.
In my many visits to Australia, I have witnessed the courage and hope that have guided the nation's long and sometimes difficult journey towards reconciliation.
The extent of that highlighted just moments later. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe escorted out of the Great Hall. MPs later condemned the interruption, which didn't mar the sense of occasion for those who'd gathered.
Is a head of state, no matter what people say.
I thanked her for coming all this way. I gave her a tea towel.
King Charles is only the second reigning monarch and the first ever king to visit Parliament House, following in the footsteps of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who opened this very building in 1988. King Charles then held private one-on-one sessions with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, before heading to the CSIRO and observing a simulated bushfire, the real version of which have dominated Australian summers. The climate-conscious king seeking to advance the environmental cause across his 16 visits to Australia.
There we go. Little pat again.
Laying down more roots for future generations.
If the summer doesn't get too hot.
Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
The University of Canberra will cut hundreds of jobs as it tries to fill a multi-million-dollar financial hole. Staff and students have been told that more than 200 roles will go, just weeks after the city's other university also announced sweeping cuts. Courtney Barrett-Peters reports.
Another university on the ropes.
We are spending more than we're bringing in. We can be sustainable, but we're going to have to do something urgent and quite significant.
The University of Canberra needs to save $50 million by the end of next year. It's already cut 2 senior executive roles, while another 9 senior managers also have their jobs on the line. But the majority of savings are expected to come from staff salaries, through more than 200 jobs. Days after the Australian National University blamed similar cuts on changes to international student caps, the University of Canberra is blaming itself.
I think there's a collective responsibility there from management at all levels. I think we've lost sight of some of the trends and it's very regrettable.
While it's not clear who will be affected, the cuts are expected to hurt the faculties the most. But some in administration and professional services will also lose their jobs.
To some extent, the writing's been on the wall. This has been a situation that has been sort of on the cards for a little while in terms of UC's financial mismanagement.
The news didn't come as a shock to the union, but it did for students.
A bit surprised, really. We didn't really know much about it.
If we don't have the right people to teach what we are studying, it could affect the way that we learn.
Unlike ANU, which is asking staff to forego an agreed pay rise, staff at UC are assured that won't happen to them.
I am not going to propose that any member of staff forego a pay rise or make that kind of sacrifice.
It's not yet clear when the university will begin consultation with staff. Courtney Barrett-Peters, ABC News, Canberra.
More than 20 dogs have been euthanized at a pound in Queanbeyan after a dog tested positive for canine parvovirus. The facility has been closed since the disease was identified earlier this month and will remain shut indefinitely. Parvo is highly contagious and deadly for dogs, causing symptoms including diarrhoea, vomiting and lethargy. It affects unvaccinated dogs and puppies. Members of the community who have recently adopted or collected a new dog have been contacted by the pound. The Queanbeyan Palerang Council is encouraging locals to make sure their dogs are vaccinated against parvovirus and get them checked if they appear unwell. Australia is planning to dramatically lower what's considered safe levels of PFAS in drinking water. These so-called forever chemicals have been linked to cancer and take thousands of years to break down.
They're in our clothes, cooking products and makeup. PFAS chemicals have even made it into drinking water. Now health authorities are trying to limit that.
Our goal is to produce the highest quality evidence-based guidelines that will enable the states and the water suppliers to supply safe, clean water.
A growing body of research is linking long-term PFAS exposure to cancer and thyroid issues.
Every day of your life, 2 litres of water per day.
The proposed limits follow a crackdown in the US. Under the guidelines, the safe levels of 4 PFAS chemicals would be slashed, but PFOA, recently declared carcinogenic by the World Health Organization, would still be 50 times higher than America's limit. The forever chemicals have been used across the country, including in firefighting foam. But most drinking water has never been tested for PFAS, so the true extent of the problem remains unknown. However, recent samples taken in Sydney detected some of the chemicals at several water filtration plants.
Drinking water remains safe if it complies with the current guideline.
Authorities say the draft guidelines could mean one supply in the Blue Mountains would not be compliant, and there would likely be more.
I think there will be lots of communities that are out of compliance with that, and we will need to put in solutions.
Technology to remove the chemicals is costly.
The customer bills would increase to reflect the additional costs.
There are legal options available to us. We do want to make sure that the cost to the community of pollution is borne by the polluter.
The proposal's open for feedback and will be finalised by April next year. The onus then falls on state and territory governments to enforce any new standards. Xanthi Gregory, ABC News, Sydney.
Israel has carried out multiple strikes on Lebanon's capital after announcing it would target Hezbollah's financial operations. Shortly after the warning, explosions rocked Beirut. The Israeli Air Force hit at least 10 sites across the city, as well as targets in the Bekaa Valley in the east and near the border in the south. Meanwhile, in Gaza, hopes of a ceasefire are dwindling after an Israeli strike left 87 people dead or missing. Here's Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran.
Explosions at the edge of Beirut's international airport, lighting a night sky blanketed in smoke.
We will be attacking a large number of targets in the next few hours and more targets later tonight.
The target, Al-Qad al-Hassan, a sanctioned non-profit the US says the Hezbollah militant group uses to manage its money. Also used by civilians, it has more than a dozen branches in the densely populated capital. It's a second straight day of strikes inside Beirut. Here, the IDF hitting what it says was a Hezbollah intelligence centre and weapons facility, killing 3 of the group's commanders.
The US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says Washington wants Israel to scale back its strikes on its northern neighbour, particularly in and around Beirut, adding that the number of civilian casualties is simply far too high. These latest strikes suggest that plea from Israel's strongest ally have gone unheard.
All the while in Gaza, Israel's offensive in the north continues. The streets of Beit Lahia coated in ghostly grey. The dust of buildings once homes, now piles of rubble.
We were asleep around midnight when it suddenly felt like an earthquake hit the area.
Dozens killed by an Israeli strike in the northern Gaza city.
All those who were martyred here are children, women and displaced people who fled from other areas due to heavy strikes, seeking shelter in what they believed to be a safer place.
Children cowering in hospitals after what they've endured. The Israeli military accused Hamas of exaggerating the death toll and insisted the strike used precise munitions against a Hamas target. The killing of the group's leader, Yahya Sinwar, doing little to slow the relentless barrage in Gaza. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Lawyers say Qantas is facing a compensation bill of hundreds of millions of dollars for illegally sacking workers in the middle of pay negotiations. 1,700 ground crew, including baggage handlers and cleaners, will receive various payouts after being let go during the pandemic.
What a win! It was a day that these Qantas workers had been fighting for 4 years. Compensation for being illegally sacked when the airline outsourced their roles as they were preparing to strike.
I can put it behind me now, and it can pay bills that I didn't anticipate.
I expected to be there till I retired, and when this happened, it was an absolute shock.
1,700 SAC ground crew will now receive payouts for what they went through, ranging from $30,000 to $100,000 each.
Marriages have broken down as a result of this. People have lost houses. People have had distress, have had mental illnesses.
Workers will also be compensated for 1 year of lost work after the court found the airline would have legally outsourced their roles in 2021.
This is the spirit of Australia. You dig in when it gets tough and you don't give up. And here we are today having a massive victory.
Altogether, the airline is facing a big bill.
It'll probably end up somewhere between, say, $300 and $350 million in compensation.
While this might sound like a lot, this lawyer says that the company still saved cash by outsourcing the roles.
Well, I think what they've done was the right decision financially because it will have saved them money.
The airline had set aside $70 million for this legal battle, but now it has to go away and figure out the final bill. It says it'll be working with the union through a mediation process, and once again, it's apologised to its sacked workers. The airline is also facing a fine, which will be decided at a later date. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, the looming gas supply shortfall threatening how we do business.
Neither New South Wales or Victoria has in place a plan that will adequately address the shortfall of gas.
For every working day, it's about $1,600.
Companies will either have to decide whether to stay in Australia or how they are going to change their manufacturing.
Also, I'll speak to Riley Keough, granddaughter of one of the most famous men who ever lived, Elvis Presley.
The US presidential election is now just weeks away, and both candidates have been out campaigning for votes in key battleground states.
Happy birthday to you.
Kamala Harris was serenaded by Stevie Wonder as she marked her 60th birthday at 2 church services outside of Atlanta. The Democratic nominee will need strong results in the majority black cities of Detroit and Atlanta to repeat President Biden's 2020 wins in Michigan and Georgia. In suburban Philadelphia, Donald Trump swapped his suit for an apron and learned how to cook fries at McDonald's. Thousands of people gathered outside to watch the Republican nominee serve drive-through to customers.
This is fun. I could do this all day. I wouldn't mind this job. I like this job. I think I might come back and do it again. Thank you.
A referendum on whether Moldova should join the European Union is now too close to call. The referendum results, which hang in the balance, are a shock for pro-EU President Maia Sandu, who topped the first round of presidential elections held at the same time. The 2 polls have been overshadowed by fears of Russian meddling amid the war in neighbouring Ukraine. Moldova has alternated between pro-Western and pro-Russian governments since the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union. Ties with Moscow have deteriorated under Ms Sandu, who condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Drivers in Australia's biggest cities are painfully aware of the cost of using toll roads. Now a leading industry figure is calling for a shake-up of how those charges are set. Former Transurban director Tony Shepherd has told Four Corners toll companies should not get automatic price increases above inflation on new roads.
Edwina Hyler used to travel to work on Sydney's toll roads, but when the amount she was paying each week hit $150 in December last year, she quit her job and found a new one closer to home and away from the tolls.
It just wasn't, feasible anymore to pay that kind of money in tolls just to get to work. Like, I'd have to work a day just to pay tolls.
It's a feeling familiar to drivers in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, where toll prices have surged during the cost of living crisis. That's because they're pegged to inflation, and so Transurban earned a record $3.5 billion in revenue last financial year, operating 18 of Australia's 22 toll roads.
Their business is not there for the public good, it's there to make money.
Even in times of low inflation, most of its tolls are guaranteed to rise by 4% a year. A giant of the industry and former Transurban director Tony Shepherd says that deal should be off the table for future toll roads.
Well, I think in new projects, I think we can eliminate it. Now, we put it in originally because the risks were just so enormous, and that was what we needed to get people to be prepared to invest.
Transurban declined an interview and did not respond to questions, but in a statement said,
"Toll prices in Australia and how much they rise have always been determined by state or local governments, as have the charges associated with toll notices and late payments."
The New South Wales government has promised to slash toll prices in Sydney and is now negotiating a new tolling model with Transurban.
If we don't reform tolls, Sydney will become a more congested place to live. It'll be less productive than it should be. It'll have a real impact on people's lives, particularly in Sydney's outer suburbs.
Since Edwina Hyland changed jobs, the state government's introduced a 2-year $60 per week cap on tolls. But when it ends, drivers like her may be back to paying full price. Pat McGrath, ABC News.
It's been revealed the Tasmanian government partially relied on artificial intelligence in assessing plans to build a contentious luxury hotel. The Greens say it's an alarming use of the new technology, while the local council is considering a legal challenge.
Shambroad's $65 million proposal for a luxury hotel at Kangaroo Bay on Hobart's eastern shore was granted major project status by the Planning Minister last week.
In the submission, it outlines 100 full-time equivalent jobs in construction and 443 full-time equivalent jobs across the southern region.
But those job numbers are now under scrutiny after documents tabled in Tasmania's Parliament showed the Department of Treasury had initially noted that the veracity of these estimates cannot be tested. In response, the State Planning Office revealed it had run the numbers past Microsoft's AI assistant Copilot and found Shambroad's estimates were reasonable.
This is an alarming use of a new technology. School teachers wouldn't accept this kind of use of artificial intelligence for homework, and it certainly shouldn't be something that the government is using.
Copilot bases its responses on information found on the internet, and even Microsoft warns that while its answers might sound convincing, they're sometimes incomplete and inaccurate. But the Tasmanian government is defending its use.
It's my understanding and my advice is it's not unusual in terms of the assessment process.
Major project status means the hotel proposal will now be assessed by a panel set up by the Planning Commission rather than the Clarence City Council.
This sort of finding calls into question the validity of the whole report. Just because you can't disprove something doesn't make it correct.
The council is already taking court action to try and buy back the land from the developer, and it's now seeking legal advice about whether it can challenge the government's major project declaration. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
To finance now, and soaring gold and silver prices have helped push the local share market and the Aussie dollar higher today. Here's Alan Kohler.
Global uncertainty, both in the Middle East and the US election, has sent investors rushing into precious metals, the traditional safe havens. And that sent gold up 37% in 12 months to a record high, and silver up 45% to a 12-year high. And analysts are predicting that this run for both gold and silver has further to go. Silver jumped a huge 6.3% over the weekend, and palladium 3.7%, while oil fell 2.5%. Now, part of the reason for the run is anticipation that China will eventually announce some decent stimulus for its ailing economy any day now, which is pushing all commodities up and leading to gains by mining stocks on the market, and they underpinned a solid gain on the ASX today. But two stocks were dumped for similar reasons. WiseTech Global and Mineral Resources are both dealing with messy scandals involving their founders and CEOs, Richard White and Chris Ellison, respectively. Ellison is accused of tax evasion, and the WiseTech board has been in crisis meetings all weekend dealing with allegations about Richard White's sex life. Investors looked at their watches, made excuses and left both companies today, although WiseTech is still well up for the year, as the chart shows. The US market is in suspended animation awaiting November the 5th, and the stakes are high. American share prices have outperformed all others for 15 years for the simple reason that American companies have captured all of the earnings per share growth in the world since the GFC. It's quite staggering. And the Australian dollar stayed above 67 US cents, 100 yen and $1.10 Kiwi. And that's finance.
It feels like the season's only just begun, but with AFLW finals around the corner, there have been mixed reactions to the league's trial of condensed fixturing. After squeezing 11 games into a 10-week home and away season, the players say something needs to change.
After a whirlwind 8 weeks, the AFLW finals picture is becoming clearer.
Not wanting to look too far ahead, but also knowing, we do need to keep winning.
Having won 4 in a row, Melbourne is one of the teams on the cusp of the top 8. The Demons will need to overcome an equally strong Hawthorn, which remains in contention for the minor premiership.
We've had a lot of success and a lot of change this year as well, and I think that it's about maintaining our form, not looking too far ahead, just taking it week by week.
Thursday's battle between the two sides will be the opening game of the competition's Indigenous round, capping off a controversial condensed home and away season with the 18 teams, each playing 11 games across 10 weeks.
I think that there's general consensus that the condensed fixture is probably not something that we'd like to continue with. It just puts a lot of strain on the players and on the clubs themselves.
The league has a guaranteed minimum of 12 matches per team next season and is looking at bringing the season forward to an earlier start to alleviate the fixture crunch.
And hopefully we've learned from this year from a time slot point of view, from broadcasting, we can take those learnings forward, but supportive of playing as much football as possible.
It's obviously been a bit of a tough period, the condensed fixture with concussion and injury. We've obviously seen key players go out and find it hard to get up. But I think the overarching philosophy is we want to be playing more footy.
There'll be more footy in more places this weekend, with Darwin and Cairns hosting matches on the first week of the Indigenous round. Fraser Fife, ABC News, Melbourne.
New Zealand is celebrating its first Women's T20 World Cup triumph after defeating South Africa by 32 runs in the final in Dubai. Player of the tournament, Amelia Kerr, top scored with 43 as the White Ferns made 5 for 158. Kerr also took 3 wickets as South Africa was restricted to 9 for 126. It was a remarkable turnaround for New Zealand, who came into the tournament on a 10-game losing streak. Charles Leclerc has won the US Formula One Grand Prix ahead of his Ferrari teammate Carlos Sainz. It was the 3rd victory of the year for the 27-year-old from Monaco. Lando Norris had finished 3rd but received a 5-second penalty for passing Max Verstappen off the track. Verstappen was elevated to 3rd position ahead of Norris and extended his championship lead over the Englishman to 57 points. Australian Oscar Piastri finished 5th.
It's just how it is. It's quite clear in the ruling you can't overtake outside the white line. Yeah, there's not more to say. I mean, it's painful, but up until then, of course, we had a really good battle.
To the weather now and your observations of sunset last night across Lake Tuggeranong, thanks to John Barber of Greenway. Meanwhile, in Woden this morning, David Flannery captured mum and dad with their tawny frog-mouthed chicks at Pierce. How cute. After a low of 5 north side and 10 in the valley, we reached a sunny top of 25 south side today with light breezes in some parts. Around our region, Perisher began with a low of -2 and 0 for Thredbo, and through the day there were tops of 21 along the coast and 30 for Griffith. Across the nation, Perth and Hobart began with lows of 8 and Alice Springs reached the top of 38 degrees today. The satellite shows patchy cloud around a low over the Tasman Sea, generating the odd shower along coastal New South Wales. Cloud across northern WA and northwest Northern Territory with moist unstable air is producing showers and storms. Cloud with a trough and front over southern WA is bringing showers near the coasts. Tomorrow, another stinker for Alice with 38 degrees. The forecast top. Showers are forecast for Darwin, Cairns and Hobart. Around our region, Coomera is among the cooler places tomorrow morning with a low of 2 before warming up to a partly cloudy top of 28. In the high country, Thredbo can expect a top of 16 and along the coast, 25 is the top for Nowra and Bega. After a forecast low of 5 north side with the chance of fog in the early morning, Canberra can expect a top of 28 and a partly cloudy afternoon with light winds becoming northwesterly, 15 to 20 kilometres per hour in the late afternoon, then becoming light in the evening. The sun will rise at 6:07 a.m. and set at 7:29 p.m. Looking ahead, partly cloudy conditions are forecast from Wednesday to Saturday, medium chance of showers on Sunday, and showers are also forecast on Monday. And that's the latest from the Canberra newsroom. I'm Adrienne Francis. Great to be with you. Stay with us now for 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson. Enjoy your evening. Yeah, good night.